I started off like 5 minutes too, and it's only the student center. 10 minutes. But somebody thank you very well, that's walking up. Whatever. Has bodies, cell phone, well, plug in here.
Yeah. It's good to see you. So is there anything you guys want to talk about today, or should we just like go home? Maria, you okay?
Yeah.
Eric? Things are good? Okay. Hello? Is there anything out there? No one? Sure.
I don't know how to put the question, but I maybe don't feel like I feel like I gotta have stuff.
Okay. Yeah, Eric.
That's enough. Is non-question. I asked how you form a good question.
How do you form what makes a good question? Can I share with you some personal narratives? Is that okay? There was a Scottish philosopher named David Hume, I think around the 17th century. And like the rest of us, he was a product of his time. By this time, the presence of God had diminished a little bit, so he wrote this book. And he had said something relatively interesting, that no one can really go beyond their own experiences, which is a really good thing to say. That just in case you read a book by Jordan Peterson or the Buddha or Muhammad or whoever the case may be, you should always be aware of your age, your experience, your culture, and don't assume that just because you read something profound, you understand it. So when I was about, I suppose, your age or so, my questions had to do with how do I become a better tennis player? How do I become a better soccer player? How do I become a better chess player? Those were the questions. And young people have all sorts of different questions, depending on their temperament, depending on how they were raised by their parents, their social environment. And way back then, there were no gender issues as far as I know, and those who had some, I suppose, discomfort with their gender identity, they would always express them behind closed doors to people who were familiar to them, trustworthy. Then time passes and you end up in school, and then you have a different set of questions. How do I solve this particular math problem? How do I write a good essay? How do I make my parents happy? And then in my case, I ran into Hussein. Yeah. He had some interesting ideas that I couldn't really understand in my 20s, but I was curious sometimes. I would ask questions that came out of curiosity. And then it was a very private setting. It was only 3 of us and Hussein, and the questions became a bit more focused, a bit more specific. But it was no longer about tennis. It was no longer about school. It was no longer about physical life. I don't think any of us ever brought forth problems we had with our parents, not that we did, or problems we had with our companions. So anything that was secular, there were no questions that were ever brought up into those gatherings. The questions, again, were very focused. It was about Quran, maybe some poetry. How does one define a self, how he became the sort of a human being that he became. So it was very, very focused. And the reason why it was focused was because most of us, the three of us in the room, with Hussein became four, because we liked him very much. I could say because we loved him very much. That love has this power to kind of get rid of all these ridiculous questions that people usually ask. You become very monogamous. That's what love does to you. Whether you love God, whether you love tennis, whether you love reading a book, it doesn't really matter. That's the power of love. It makes you monogamous. It doesn't mean that you can't cheat. And by cheat, I mean you can be in love with tennis. Once in a while, you can play soccer. And then after a while, you say, I should have just spent that time bettering my tennis game as opposed to playing soccer. Okay. So whenever you like something passionately and you feel kind of responsible towards it, guilt comes about, shame comes about. These are just natural, organic elements that come with it. And so we would ask Hussein questions, but we didn't really understand what we were asking. All we knew is that he talks, sparks fly, you become curious, somewhat interested, you go home, you think about it, maybe you dream about it, maybe you have an insight about something. You write your question down on a piece of paper, and then you take it to his house the following day or the following week, and you present it to him. And he goes on for 5, 6, 7, 10 hours telling you what the answer is. Then there came a point where we wouldn't go to his house with notepads. Each one of us would simply have one question. And we don't really know how those questions came about. But the questions had to do with philosophy, with religion. And if you forgive me, with this thing we call spirituality. Okay. Nothing else. All of our questions revolve around those things. Time passed where there were no longer any questions. Hussein would say, so do you guys have any questions? And none of us would say anything. And hello. And the difficulty about not asking questions is that now the responsibility is either on me, or is on the parent, or is on the teacher to come up with some sort of a thing to talk about for the next 5, 6 hours. By the time you get to a place where you have no questions, it's kind of like knock and the door shall be opened unto you. But you have to knock on many doors, because asking questions is really like dating. And you don't really know what you're looking for. Initially it's, I want someone who is like my age. I want someone who plays chess. I want someone who thinks like me. Something like that. As you mature and as you gain more experience and you become more seasoned by your own experiences, you begin to understand what exactly it is that you're looking for. Again, like dating. And there comes a point you say, I'm not really looking to date anyone. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, that's fine. You've kind of grown comfortable with the fact that it is true that there are 8 billion people on the planet, but there is no one that you're interested in. If there is magic in the universe and someone all of a sudden drops, on your lap in your life, if they happen to be interesting, you say, okay, how about some coffee? But you're not going to go out there looking for someone, chasing someone. And I think it takes a long, long time. And it's your right, as you're kind of going through life, to have life push you around. Those pushing you around will eventually create some questions. And questions are like a sickness, and you're looking for a remedy. And hopefully there comes a point where your life is not that interesting. And because you don't find your life interesting and you don't find other people's lives very interesting, questions don't come up. And you've asked so many questions that the powers of your own intellect are no longer sufficient. They're no longer interesting. So you kind of go into this very quiet mode for a long, long time. And like a nice little animal, you begin to sniff. You don't use your eyes, you don't use your ears, you smell for things. You know, and that's a metaphor. And though you may have a lot of questions, you just don't ask them. I don't know how or why it happens. You know. But again, if you compare that to the dating game, ask anyone else in this class who have some age on us and will tell you they've gone out with 20, 30, 40 people, and then you'll just give up. And then you wait and someone is there to fix your phone, happens to be an AT&T fellow. You open it and say, you're the one I've been looking for. It's magic. I think the only thing that a good teacher can do in any field of life is that they make you interested in what they're interested or what they're passionate about. Once you're infected, contaminated with their passion, questions come up. You ask a lot of questions because it's a new world you've entered. And there comes a point you have no questions, you just like to go there and just sit. There is no reason to talk. And then, can I tell you a story? I remember many, many years ago with Krishnamurti, we were on some sort of a hike. You know, I was a young kid. There was this man about to die. So he gets tired, he sits, and by default, I sit, and he looks at me and says, "So Amir, do you have any questions?" I say, "I don't have many questions. I have one question, but you can't answer my question." And so I just put my head on his lap. Just nothing else. And that was it. And I think you get to a point where you may not know what your question is, but you understand that no one can answer whatever your yearnings or longings may be. But that takes time. If any of you in this class have been to therapy, like for 20 years, what will happen is if you have a good therapist, after a while you realize you don't really need to go to the therapist office anymore. You kind of can understand your own dilemma, you can process it well, understand it well, and hopefully find some answers. But if you're asking a question in regards to this class, I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't watch porn, I don't do very many things. I like to think about things once in a while. So a good question for me is something that relates to life, to philosophy, to religion. So, sure.
I always feel like most of the questions I have in person that I feel like I should ask them in class because everyone is asking a personal question. Time and space.
You can't but ask personal questions. Because first, you're young. Second, life is a puzzle. You're just starting your journey. A lot of things that are happening to you, you just don't get right now. And so you can't ask impersonal questions. You know, it's about you. It's about your dilemmas in life. Hopefully, if you get to a place where it's kind of like, you know, if you've been to AA, I haven't. But we had a car wash that was, you know, across the street from the AA center. And what happens when you're going through rehab is it's all about you. You know, your wife left you, your kids hate you, you hate yourself, you have a good amount of regret. You know, it's kind of like Noah. You know, the entire world is drowned and the only person who is alive is you and there is no one around you. That's a lot of pain to be had. And so you can't but just talk about yourself and your issues. And there comes a point where hopefully you have been sober for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and someone from the AA center calls you and says, listen, we've heard some things about you and they're good things. We were wondering if you could actually guide this group of people. And what you do, you still talk about yourself, but you have the ability to universalize your experience. Every person in that room, let's just say 20 people who are there for rehab, for some strange, magical, mysterious reason, the moment your mouth opens, you're able to kind of talk in a way that every single person in that room can relate to. It's about you, but it transcends you. It goes beyond you. And you're not there yet. And I'm not there yet. You know, someone like the Buddha can come forth and say, well, I'm not going to talk about myself. I'm just going to talk about the totality of life. I'm not the Buddha. I'm just this pathetic little man with a pathetic little life, even more pathetic set of ideas. So talk about yourself. But هر کسی از ظن خود شد یار من و از درون من نجست اسرار من. If you want to ask questions that have to do with you, and your questions have a lot of history, and that history is very, very painful. If you speak your question to the ears of strangers, all they will hear is the words, not the history, not the pain, and then you'll feel betrayed. So even if you want to ask personal questions, make sure you find the right ears. Otherwise, all you'll deal with is people assuming that I understand you when in fact they don't. Yeah. That's it? Are we done? Yeah?
How do you deal with disappointment? Someone that you love disappoints you. That makes life.
Someone that you love disappoints you?
Yeah, like something I've been fed is like, and I do believe it, but I haven't applied it a lot. But like, yeah, just forgiving the person. I don't know. That used to that.
Can I tell you a story? It comes from my good friend. His name is Mullah Nasruddin. He is like a Native American jester or clown. You know, he's that Shakespearean comedian who comes forth and tells the king that he sucks as a human being, but only he can do that. So it's the Middle Eastern clown, and there's a good amount of wisdom that comes out of his mouth. So in one of his stories, there is this woman married to this man for many, many years. One day she comes, and puts some food in front of him. And the husband looks at his wife and says, "What's that dot on your forehead? And when did it come about?" And the woman looks at him and says, "This deformity you see on my face came about when you ceased to love me." See, what happens when you're in love, you become blind. Your companion doesn't use the bathroom. The companion doesn't stink. The companion is beyond human. But the moment you cease to love the way you used to, you realize they have a lot of flaws. So when you talk about disappointment, the thing you need to know, first of all, if you're 18, you love an 18-year-old. And they suck. They're incomplete in many ways, they're deformed in many ways, you know. And we're not even talking about yet the American culture that just makes relationship very tough, you know. Forgiveness is a different issue. Forgiveness is, you know, you walk into relationships, you come to this class, and you expect to stay here till about 10:15. And you realize, well, the class is dead, I am monotone, I have nothing to say, and you say, man, I woke up for this. So whenever you expect something and it doesn't pan out the way you wanted to, you have no choice but to be disappointed. And the bigger your love is, the longer you have to wait to be disappointed. If you love an 18-year-old, just give it 2 weeks. If you love someone like Socrates, first he's 70, he's dead. You know, he inspired Plato. Plato wrote this big fat book. It's going to take you a long, long time to understand philosophy, to understand love, to understand wisdom, to understand the relationship between a teacher and student. Once you become autonomous, then you can kind of grow out of love of Socrates. So the bigger the pool, the more the fantasies and dreams can stay alive. Pool. No, pool. Yeah. I know that Chris talked about Rumi. You know, Plato's love for Socrates was so great that the first 10, 15, 20 years of his life, everything he wrote was about Socrates. Only when he realized that Socrates has some shortcomings, some flaws in his thinking, and then the Republic becomes his work, his mouthpiece. He doesn't need Socrates. But it took him 15 years. That's really good. So if you want to love someone, find someone who's like big, deep, profound. Not some scumbag.
I'm talking about a friend.
Oh, friends. You have no friends. Nobody has friends. I mean, you do have friends. Can I tell you a story? There was this guy, his name was Ali. He was Arab. There came a point where he realized he's got no friends. So every night he would go to a well nearby. He would put his head into this well and he would scream. And then he would hear the echo. That was his friend. Who can really understand your pain, your dilemmas in life? If you can find ears into which you can speak, you don't yet understand your questions or pain. You use people as a venting mechanism, and that's great. I'm glad that you have friends that you can kind of deflate a little bit. Once you become really, really mature, you can sustain your own stuff. Well, you're young right now. Have lots of friends. Use them well. That's it? Anna? Anything?
I guess I kind of have one question. Chris was talking about like stoicism, and I know you've mentioned stoicism in a few of your videos. And something I was wondering was like the like control over your emotions and your like reactions to things. I feel like there's kind of like a blurred line between like controlling your emotions and kind of like shutting them down or like pushing them away. And I was just kind of wondering like, is there a way to, I don't know, like clear that line more or like not fall into the trap of like shutting down your emotions?
You have emotions about things because you expect, because you care, because you're invested, because you're a future-oriented animal. And whenever there is disappointment, you have no choice but to feel deeply and then react, accordingly. I think someone like Marcus Aurelius, who wrote that ridiculous book, The Meditations, you walk out of your tent at 9 in the morning, you go into the battlefield until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, you kill a whole bunch of people, and you may be somewhat indifferent, but nevertheless, there's a part of you that's greedy, that wants to win. Then you go home, and I remember when you watch this battlefield, you are engaged internally. And then you go home and then you say, well, what was that all about? And then you sit and you write this wonderful piece of poetry. And then you give it to people. And then people, someone like me, who is profoundly ignorant and gullible, looks at this passage and say, oh, one should be in life but not be of it. Yeah, get married, just don't be bothered by your companion's misdeeds. Are you kidding? I mean, first, I think you need to be really, really old to come to a place where you say, it doesn't matter. Don't give in to your emotions so quickly. You're 18. You have no choice but to be this bundle of emotions erupting every single moment. And you have emotions because what are you going to do, man? You need to go to school. You need to graduate. You need to make money. You need to find a companion. You need to figure out who the hell you are, what your passions are, and then pursue them. You need to please your boss so you can have your job, so you can make money, so you can get a pay raise. You need to buy a house and protect your investment. Maybe you'll have kids, and then you have to figure out if you want to send them to public school or private school. These are the things you have no choice but to care about. Then time passes, you evaluate your life and you realize, well, you're no longer 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and you spend most of your time and energy and emotions on things that are just useless now. When you're 80, you don't want your son to come to you and say, Dad, I need money. You need a son who comes to your house and says, okay, Dad, let me vacuum your house. Let me wash the dishes. Let me take you to Safeway. Let's go for a walk. Your father doesn't need to be harassed by ridiculous emotions. He needs someone that's useful to him. He doesn't care about your issues. Stoics are right that emotions entangle you, imprison you, and you react and then you regret. But for you not to have emotions means you shouldn't care. And for you not to care means you have to have this rich understanding. You don't right now. It's one of those shadows on the wall. If you go back to Plato's cave, Stoicism is a shadow on the wall. Don't trust it. Buddhism is a shadow on the wall. They'll all deceive you. This idea of detachment is good for later in life. If you have $20 in your pocket, and if you have 1,000 in your savings, if you lose the 20, you're not going to care as much. So one of the reasons as to why you don't need to care is because you have power. As an 18-year-old young man, you don't have power. And it's not good to be like an ostrich. Put your head in this dark hole and say, well, it doesn't exist. School does exist. Money does exist. An apartment does exist. Parents do exist. Friendships do exist. You need those so that when you're 40, you have power. Then you can walk around town and just say, I don't really care. If you don't have an insurance policy, if you hit someone, you'll pay the price. If on the other hand you have insurance, you have power. You just say, you guys deal with it. You can just attend to your life. If you go back to, I think Iska's question about is life a game, it's a joke, it's all that stuff. It's all true. It's a joke, it's a game, but you should take it very, very seriously. Fear? It's really good. All I eat right now is vegetables because I fear having pain. I write more than I did before because I fear death and not being able to complete certain ideas that I have. I walk a lot now. Biological evolution, I think for some strange reason, it has injected fear in us. It's good to be afraid, it protects you. That's one kind of organic fear given to us by nature. The other is your own life experiences. If you have failed a class and it has delayed you a semester to your graduation, you should fear failing other classes, and you should fear yourself being lazy, and you should fear you not doing the assigned work for a class. Those kinds of fears protect you. This idea that the past doesn't exist and you shouldn't think about the past and you should always live about the present. It's just one of those new age, crap that's fed to all of us. The truth is the past is filled with beautiful information that you could use and apply to your life. And every time you feel as if you're repeating the same mistakes, fear will come about. And that fear will protect you from repeating the same mistakes. Are some fears imaginary? Absolutely. But most of the fears that we have, they are really grounded in practical aspects of life.